Welcome to the Feature Spotlight webinar for October 2025. We have much to discuss today, so we should probably go ahead and get right into it. This month, we are going to briefly discuss the upcoming 6.1.350 interim release, which will be the last minor release, I believe, before the release of 6.1.500. Speaking of 6.1.500, there is a new feature which we'll be taking a much closer look at in a few moments. It's called Pathfinder. We'll discuss that in due course. And then we'll end the webinar with a list of some other enhancements, as well as some bug fixes that will also be included in .500. Let's start off with the 6.1.350 release. This release is largely a bug fix release, although there are some functionality changes in it, much of it in the background, but let's take a bit of a look at it. First of all, if you're using Japanese usernames, which I doubt really is relevant to anybody here, Japanese script is sort of interesting in the computer world because you have both full-width characters and half-width characters. I'm not a Japanese specialist. I don't entirely know what those two things mean other than what the names imply. However, for SAML logins, if you were using, I believe it was a mix of half-width and full-width characters, things would get a little confusing because they're literally two different alphabets as far as the computer goes. So anyway, there was a trouble with SAML logins specifically for Japanese language usernames that were related to that half-width and full-width character set issue. Some security updates for the online form designer, and this is really primarily the reason for the .350 release. We are using version 4 of CK Editor. We're on an extended support plan for that, which includes fundamental security fixes. There were some known issues that came up with CK Editor. This fixes those known issues by applying a new version of CK Editor version 4. We do have plans to switch at some point to CK Editor 5. That's a big ask, and we're doing a lot of other things for .500, so we are going to get around to updating the OFD with CK Editor 5, and indeed, with some of the controls that you're used to seeing on the form, there are new versions of those controls, and so in the future, we're going to be adding those new controls as well. For now, however, the important thing is to ensure that the online form designer is secure. So we have the new version of version 4 that will be included in the .350 release. Another issue, and again, it largely comes from Japanese, where we have labels for workspaces. And depending on your culture, it might show up in English. The name might show up in Japanese, depending on some culture resource files that you would create and place into Process Director. Because we have changed the UI, the timing of when a workspace name gets refreshed is now different than it used to be in the old UI when the entire tab set was completely refreshed. It doesn't work that way anymore. At the very top of the screen, we have the menu bar. It doesn't get refreshed as much, nor does the workspace navigation bar get refreshed as much. That timing has changed, and as a result, to change those labels, which are, it's the same workspace name, but depending on your culture, it'll show up in English or Japanese. We've now set a different way of refreshing those. So if you change the user's culture in the background, their screen will also refresh to show the appropriate language for localization for workspace names. There have been some changes to custom task permissions. I don't want to spend a lot of time on this, but what I will say was in previous versions of the product, pretty much anybody could configure a custom task on a form or a process timeline. There was some discussion both internally and with customers who thought that maybe that was too loose a permission set. So we tightened those permissions up a little too much because people who were used to being able to configure custom tasks and who in fact on say the form or timeline definition did in fact have modify permissions still could not configure a custom task because we were referring to the permission set on the custom task, which we had tightened up to require modify permissions. Well, that's a little too much because if you have end users, you may not want to give them modify permission on the custom task definition itself. So tightening it up in terms of the permissions required means that you have to open up a larger set of users to those permissions. People didn't like that much either. So we've changed CT permissions so that if you want to go into a form and customize a custom task or a process timeline, either or, the custom task will now, in that use case, inherit the permission of the parent object, the form or the process timeline. So if you have modify permissions on a form definition, you'll automatically get modify permissions for that instance of the custom task that you're configuring for that form. So the modification permissions or the customization permissions available to you for form and process timeline custom tasks now inherit the permissions of the content list object that you are currently editing. That should resolve the issue. It should enable you to place more restrictive permissions on the ability of users to modify the custom tasks or even really to view the custom tasks in terms of their actual visibility on the content list or your ability to modify them from the content list, but you'd still be able to modify them as needed whenever you are configuring a custom task in the context of a form or process timeline definition. Content list searches and loading have been changed. Some of you have very, very, very large content lists with more than 2 million items in the content list. That's a lot of items. And of course, that also includes, form instances and process timeline instances, but still a lot. Some systems are running out of memory trying to load all 2 million items plus of the content list, and the system was timing out, not being able to return that many records and also to write them on the screen. So we've changed the content list and the way it works so that if you have a very large content list, then it's only going to return items in the content list as they're needed. So for example, if I have a list of folders, we're not going to return any of the folder contents to the content list until you click on one of the folders. At that point, we'll go out, we'll grab the subfolders and any objects that are included in that folder, and we'll return those, and we'll just sort of chain that all the way down. If you have a content list that has less than 50,000 items, we will still continue to load the entire content list all at one time. It's just that for very large content lists, it becomes super memory intensive trying to, to show you like 15 folders in the content list behind which are 2 million content list objects. We're not going to load those 2 million content list objects anymore. So we're calling it lazy loading. I prefer the term just-in-time loading, but if you have a very large content list, which is to say anything over 50,000 items in your content list, we're going to switch from loading the entire content list to just loading it just in time as needed. Another issue, it only shows up on mobile and it only shows up on date picker controls where there are some scroll buttons to scroll through the years, and they work fine on desktop, but They aren't working on mobile for some reason, or they weren't working on mobile, but we did go in and fix that so that now when you have a mobile device and you are using a date time picker, if you need to scroll through the years, the scroll buttons now work. And finally, on the object links tab of a form definition, uh, it's great to have the object links, and it's not just form definitions. Any object can have object links to it. We seem to have missed a very obvious thing, which is how come I cannot export the contents of the object links tab to show me all of the links to an object? How come I can't just export that to CSV? Very good question, for which we had no other answer than, yeah, we'll do that from now on. So .350 will have those object links available. And just as with other tabs, at the very top, there'll just be an action link there that you can click to export the contents of the object links tab of your object definition to a CSV file. So that is 6.1.350. That is all that's included in it. It is an interim release. And as I said, it will probably be the last interim release, or patch release for that matter, unless something super important comes up, before we release 6.1.500. I don't know the exact day that we're going to release 6.1.350, but it's going to be really soon because we've already got the build set up for it. So we're probably going to build that internally, test it for a couple of days, and it'll be out immediately after that. So look for that. 6.1.500 is also coming soon. And by soon, it could be within the next 2 months. At least that's what we're planning. It may be on the earlier side of that, not entirely sure. Depends on how things go. We're still working on some things, one of which is the main feature that we're here to discuss today, even though we're 12 minutes into the webinar and haven't talked about it. There's a new feature called Pathfinder. It is an AI chatbot feature. It will be released in version 6.1.500, sort of. On 6.1.500, you will see a new page in the installation settings section of IT admin. This new page is called Pathfinder Variables. It looks like this. This page will be available and accessible to you all. It will have no information in it, at least not for you yet. What information it will have and how this is going to get set up is something that we'll talk about here in a few moments. But essentially, what Pathfinder is a way to have a custom AI chatbot that people can use to ask questions about how to use an application. We have a whole bunch of settings on this page that are all dependent on having Azure AI Foundry set up and to have it trained on whatever particular documentation you would like to have it trained on. We created it because being in addition to Process Director, we have a couple of applications called PubPro. One is Pruvia, that separately from Process Director. Generally, when customers buy a Pruvia or PubPro, they're buying those specific applications. They're fairly complex applications. They're largely for scientific and medical research publication approvals. And we needed to have a way to be able to use an AI chatbot so that people who are using those systems could ask questions about how they're used. So, for example, if we go back over and take a look at an installation of PubPro that we have running, if you look up at the top of your screen, in the upper right-hand corner, there is an extra icon here. This is the Pathfinder icon. And when you click on it, it opens up the AI chatbot window. Now, in the case of, well, PubPro in this instance, we have trained the Microsoft Azure AI Foundry setup, which is a flavor of ChatGPT 4.0, I think. We've got that all set up to we've trained it on all of the training documentation for PubPro. So if I have a question about how to use PubPro, and I'll just drop one in here, how do I uh, submit a new publication for review? Let's be sure that I have spelled everything properly. As usual, I have not, but let's correct that. Let's add my question mark and let's ask Pathfinder. Chatbot context invalid. Um, let's refresh the page. I promise you that worked 10 minutes ago. Let's go back. Let's go back to Pathfinder. How do I submit a new publication? I think that's a different question, or at least different verbiage than what I asked last time. But maybe I just kept this page open for too long and it lost context. But here we go. How do I submit a new publication? So Pathfinder provides an answer. I need to go to the PubPro submitter workspace, which is where I am right now. I have a click create publication button at the top of the screen. I certainly do. And it will open the publication form. Then I can complete the overview tab and then all of the other things that I have to do to create a new publication and submit it for review. So I can ask questions about PubPro. Notice it is about PubPro. It's not about Process Director, because the only thing that we've trained this version of Pathfinder on is the training documentation for PubPro. So we can only ask PubPro questions of it because that's really all that it knows. But that brings up an interesting feature, which is if you will have an organization, and several of our customers do, they have very complex applications that they have 75, 80, 100-page reference documents that they have to pass out, like in PDF, to all of their users so that they can use these complex applications. So we have like all sorts of really complex purchasing apps from some customers and work orders and things like that. The apps are complicated, some of which we had to create for the customer, some of which they have over the years created for themselves. Wouldn't it be great if you could take your documentation for those different applications, and obviously you may have more than one, you may have 5, 10, however many applications that you have documentation for. It'd be great if you could just throw those into Microsoft Azure AI Foundry, train the AI, and then enable people who are using your Process Director installation to ask questions about your applications and just get answers directly from the UI of the product rather than having to open up some separate PDF or what have you. So that is the plan. And we are currently looking at customers to bring in on a beta program to actually begin running it in beta on their installations, most likely on their dev installations or on a special beta installation. But this is going to make its way to everyone, and it's going to be available to everyone. I say everyone, you're going to have to be on a subscription license of Process Director for this to work. So obviously, if you're a cloud customer, you're on a subscription license, it'll be available to cloud customers. How the licensing is going to work for this, we have not determined yet. My presumption, although I may be wrong, is that it will probably be a separately licensed component, because setting up all of the Pathfinder variables that we have here. Especially if you're a cloud customer, it's going to be required to run through our Azure AI Foundry, and we're going to have to do the training. So there's going to be a significant amount of setup that has to be done to incorporate it into your installation. So I don't know how we're going to fund that, and I don't know what the licensing model is going to look like for that. But when you upgrade to 6.1.500, you're going to see this page. So I'm explaining to you why you're seeing that page whenever you do the upgrade and what its significance is. Once we iron out the licensing issues and decide how we're going to get it to end users and customers, I'll have updates in the future for that. Like I said, especially if you're a cloud customer, we're going to have to set that up for you. So it is going to change. So there is probably going to be at least a charge for that. How that's going to affect your licensing, or whether you're going to need to purchase an additional license to run it, because obviously there are ongoing costs to keeping an AI system up and running, we'll discover as we move forward. Those discussions are still going on internally, but you are going to see the Pathfinder variables page. And as you've just seen, they actually work, and we can actually create an AI system to answer user questions, to provide an online or in-context help system. Now, for this to work, there are some odd little wrinkles. One of which is the way Process Director works. Now, you probably have noticed that every time you open a form, that form opens up in a pop-up window. That's not going to be a super great way of doing things going forward. Pop-up windows, honestly, are kind of outdated. We need to have a different paradigm for that. For example, opening in a new tab rather than opening in an independent pop-up window. But even opening it up in a new tab is troublesome in the context of Pathfinder, because we have to be able to track where you are and what your user context is all the way through, which means that pop-ups are not going to work. So there's also a new global variable that is called enable pop-ups. So on the global variables page, you will also see this new variable here, enable pop-ups. The default will be set to true, which means that your version of Process Director, if you upgrade to 6.1.500, will not be affected in any way. But if you are going to run Pathfinder, you are probably going to have to change this property to false, which means that rather than opening pop-ups in a new window or forms in a new window, it's going to open them inline in Process Director in whatever context you're in. So if I set this enable pop-ups to false, as if I were using Pathfinder on this machine, then things are going to be a little bit different. Now, I wonder if it'll do it from the task list. Because now that it's set to false, if I go to my task list, and it could very well be I have no tasks in this task list, so fine. Let's go to the content list, and let's go to documentation, I think. Or where was I? Was it in product? I'm trying to remember where I tested this yesterday. I think it is in product and miscellaneous. Yes, I have a test knowledge view that I'm just going to run here from the content list. Now, whenever you run a knowledge view, and this is one of the things that will change, whenever you run a knowledge view, what you're used to seeing is being able to click here, and whenever you click, the form opens in a pop-up window. With force pop-ups, that doesn't happen. The form will open up in the context where it was invoked. So I invoked it here from a knowledge view, and it automatically opened up the form here. This is a little inconvenient because now I have to use my back button to go back to find the knowledge view, which means the knowledge view has to reload. So if you're a designer and what you really want to do is just to open up a couple of these forms to check it, it's going to get a little tedious if we force no pop-ups on you in that context. So we are also determining some differences in how the product is going to work for end users when they open a form, which will enforce no pop-ups, and how it's going to work for you as a developer or a designer whenever you are running these objects off of the content list rather than running them off of the UI. So for example, your navigation buttons here where you would open up knowledge views and stuff. We want to be able to have you open those knowledge views properly. Now, in every knowledge view, and this has been true forever, if you go to the Configure tab, the Perform this action when entry clicked option. Now, the default is always to open inline in the browser. Now, in the past, inline in the browser for form instances meant nothing because you were going to get that form opening in a new pop-up window every time you opened a form. That was the behavior of the product. Now, it would work if you were opening up process timeline instances or any other case instances or whatever. You could open up them inline in the browser, but everything else for forms specifically, inline in the browser didn't mean anything. But now it does, because now I can control at the knowledge view level whether I want to open it inline in the browser. So we just saw it open inline. That's fine. I can change that to open in a pop-up window. And now I can update and run it. And what I should see whenever I click on any of the forms that will ultimately appear, I should see them open up in a new pop-up window so that if I need to open up multiple forms, I can open them both up at the same time and do what I need to do. So with 6.1.500, the setting for opening up in a pop-up window or inline in a browser, it's now meaningful for forms. Now, as I said, the default for the enable pop-ups property is going to be true, which means that your installation of Process Director, when you upgrade to 5.00, or I'm sorry, .500, it's not going to work any differently. It's going to work just as it does now. But if you do go into installation settings and global VARs and you change that new VAR that you'll see, enable pop-ups, if you change that to false, as it is here, then you will have control at the knowledge view level of how forms are displayed whenever you click on the form instance that gets returned by your knowledge view. So it is going to be a little bit of a change to how Process Director works in the context of invoking forms. Again, the reason that we do that is we do need to track the context for Pathfinder of who you are and where that form is opening from, and we need to track that window, that entire browser window. So that's why we're not opening up pop-ups, because once you open up pop-ups, you break the relationship between the window where Pathfinder is installed and the window of this form instance that you just opened up as a pop-up. Things get pretty wonky if you do it that way. So for Pathfinder, we need to have a setting that enables us to open up forms in the same window so that we retain the context with Azure to be able to ask questions of Pathfinder. So Pathfinder is going to have some changes to the product if you choose to implement it. And if you choose to do so, then you're also going to have to set that enable pop-ups to false. It says demo here, but I think we've already demoed it, so I'm pretty happy with that. I think we can move on from Pathfinder. Some other enhancements that are going to be coming up, and we're again talking about 6.1.500. There is a new version of the form Save CT. It's really a super technical thing, and it's kind of an edge use case. But if you copy a form instance and then immediately save that form instance, it's not going to save it as a version number 0, like an unsubmitted form instance, because you're copying an existing form instance, and whatever version number it has, that version number is going to get copied over to that new form instance. So that can cause some unexpected behavior. So we've changed the form save CT to add a checkbox to specify, look, if I create this new form instance and I save it, I want you to save this form instance as version 0, so that if I hit the save button or I invoke the save, I want to take it back and reset it. No, it would be form 0. Form 0 is the version that I've created it, but it's unsubmitted. Version 1 would be a submitted version of the form. So this checkbox just enables you to specify you want to save a copied form instance as version 0. So you're going to overwrite whatever the version number was of the original form instance. Presumably, the original form instance was already submitted. Now you're copying it. So let's say it's version 1 of that submitted form instance. You copy it. That new copy is also version 1, which indicates it's already been submitted. You may not want that, so you're going to want to reset that version number, and resetting it to 0 whenever you save it means it just gets saved as a created but not yet submitted form instance. So it'll show up in your task list as a form that you need to complete or what have you. The WS User Web Service has a method called update user record. We have now added one thing that is convenient and one thing that is dangerous. You can now change both the username of a specified user and their email address using the update user record web service. Changing the email, okay, it's convenient and it's not that big of a deal to change the email. Changing the username is kind of a big deal because that's how the user logs into Process Director. So if you are going in through a web service and changing their username, you should probably tell them what their new username is. So while this is necessary and it's a specific request from some customers, you need to be aware that this is slightly dangerous and can cause some disconnect between who the user thinks they are when they log in and who you have now just said they actually are. So use some caution when using the update user record changes. Finally, we have several university systems who are facing a hard date for fully accessible forms that are available to end users. So because they have this hard date, which I believe is sometime in March of 2026, for a couple of different states, I think Wisconsin is one, Minnesota is another, I think maybe Florida as well. Not too sure about the last one. However, I do know that these mandates are coming from the state legislature that are going to require fully accessible forms. So we're working with some of our university customers to go through the forms and to find little accessibility improvement or fixes. For example, we just found one yesterday where if you have a user picker and you change the type of the user picker to drop down, then for some reason the label control doesn't get connected to the user picker if the user picker is configured as a drop-down rather than the default type ahead. So little weird things that don't come up very often. That's an odd use case because if you're a university and you have like 25,000 users of Process Director, a drop-down seems like a relatively inconvenient way to try to choose users. But these are the kind of little things that we're looking at and finding to improve the accessibility with the goal, of course, of meeting WCAG Level 2 accessibility standards. And in the case of our higher education customers, the hard out on that date is going to be, I think, it's either the end of March 30th, 2026, or somewhere in that time frame. So we're doing a lot of work on accessibility improvements and fixes, which, by the way, you can help us out if you're doing any sort of accessibility testing in your browser with, like Wave or any of the other browser accessibility tools. If you run across anything, let us know. It can only help us because it's kind of hard for us to test every possible permutation of every use case of every single control. And having many customers enables them to do some weird testing that we never would have thought of, because there's just an innumerable number of use cases that you might have. So if you run across any accessibility issues, please let us know. I'll create a ticket, or whoever receives your request will create a Jira ticket and throw that at the engineering team. And they're looking at accessibility improvements and or bug fixes very closely, and they're putting them in a very high priority for a fix. Finally, some bug fixes that we have put into 6.1.500. If you are an administrator and you are impersonating specifically a Windows user, there are some server communications error banners that kept popping up. So we fixed that. If you have a knowledge view, and in your knowledge view, you have it configured to return PDF documents, and you're showing thumbnails of the PDF documents in the knowledge view, it might time out on you because it has to generate all of those PDFs in the knowledge view, and that takes some time. And so we're changing the way KView loading works if you're showing PDF thumbnails in a knowledge view. Another weird little issue, if you have a looping segment in your process timeline, and so let's say I have a resubmit button. So you want to restart the loop if any child result equals resubmit. Not just a normal, just a normal condition. But what happens if your resubmit button has its own conditions, like select this result when, and if it meets a condition, it automatically selects the result. Well, it was automatically selecting the result, but that automatic result selection was short-circuiting the looping condition evaluation. So your process timeline would loop normally unless the result that you were using to evaluate for the loop also had its own conditions. So there was a change in prioritization there. We need to loop whether the looping result has conditions or not. So we fixed that. A weird little issue with form field values not always showing up as business value parameters. So we're used to sort of passing these form field values from a form to a business value. Wasn't always working. And I think it was whenever you tried to do it via a system variable, if I remember that one correctly. In any event, don't worry about it. It works as expected now. On the system information page in IT admin, some of the stats, some of the server stats were not showing up correctly. So we just need to make a little change to the database queries that we were using to show you those stats. Not really anything that affects the operation of the server at all. It was just a list of stats that appear on the informational pages. If you're running a proxy server between Process Director and your end users / designers, especially your designers, if you went into create new from template, there was an issue where the proxy server was interrupting that command, and it wasn't allowing you to create a new application from one of the templates in the template library. So it was a proxy server issue. We addressed that. Also, the breadcrumb navigation, at the top of the page, whenever you're looking in the content list and you open up a folder, at the very top of the page, you have these breadcrumbs here, documentation. Well, it's the documentation partition, and there's a folder called documentation, and then there's business rules. And these are all links so that you can use this breadcrumb to navigate through Process Director. Some of the links weren't working. It's as simple as that. Now they are. And finally, the last error for this month, manually starting timelines from the content list, which you technically can do. You can go in, I can see, okay, I have a process webinar timeline. I can click on that and just hit run, and it's going to ask me, are you sure you want to start this process? Now, we usually don't start processes that way, and usually only implementers / designers do it, and generally only during a testing environment. In general, the vast majority of use cases are your end users open up a form, they submit it, submitting the form invokes the process timeline. But if you have access to the content list, you can, as I just showed, manually start any process timeline you want, which is fine. However, we're running into some cases where manually starting the timeline, like I just did not call the form for the timeline as expected. So whenever you tried to open it, there would be no form associated with that timeline. So there's a little disconnect there. I'm not sure when that got introduced, but I am sure when it got fixed, which was within the last 4 weeks. So that's no longer an issue if you are manually starting timelines. Like I said, generally something that really only applies to implementers and developers. And with that, we are done with today's webinar. Thank you for joining me. I did go a little long today, which I apologize for, but there was just a lot of stuff to discuss. Have a great month. For those of you who attend the training webinar, I'll look forward to seeing you on Thursday. For the rest of you, I'll look forward to seeing you again next month. Until then, so long.